Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to quickly jump.
Oh, sorry. Go.
It's okay. You can go ahead. Do the morning. Do the morning thing. It's all right. No
We're all
problem.
waiting.
We are jumping in today with our topic. Today, our topic is around an article from Medium. UMesh is talking about data product operating model. How do you use data in an operational way? What does this look like? And how will you maintain this over time? So that's our topic for today. Let's do the intros. Good morning, Seth.
And it's exciting. I'm so excited to talk, I guess. Happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
There we go. Okay.
There it is. Let's pick up the news. Let's go across the news real quick here. So one news bit that came out recently was something that I think I came across a tweet on Twitter somewhere, or I guess, do you have to say X, formerly known as Twitter now? Is that the new tenure?
I think so.
So a tweet came out on X that was talking about this thing called Azure Diagrams. And the link is in the description or the title of this video already. So you can see Azure Diagrams for yourself. It's a free platform. It's basically for designing architectures of Microsoft. And the really interesting part is you can build these. It's all the Microsoft components. You know, here's how you get a OneLake. Here's where a blob storage account is occurring. You can use little arrows and they can link together and show you data flows. Really interesting stuff. Great tool. And it also sounds like they're trying to make a community of diagrams. So you can create a diagram, write your language around what it is and describe it and detail it. And then you can share it, which is kind of really neat. So then other people can take it from there and potentially utilize it and change it, tweak it for their needs. Great way to articulate a architecture diagram. Very cool tool. Tommy, have you been playing with this one?
Yeah, man. I mean, there's so many diagram software. First off, though, now that you said it out loud, I think I would prefer you say we found it on Twitter. We say we found it on X. I'm fine changing to semantic models. That terminology, no problem.
Yeah, too bad. Some you like, some you don't, man.
Yep, you gotta take it all or nothing.
Guess what? You don't get to choose the name of the company. Somebody else does.
Yeah, apparently I don't have the budget to buy X to change it back. But anyways, just wanted to put that out there. I mean, there's so many diagram softwares and so many places you see diagrams around what we do. It's nice that there's something actually in Azure about Azure from a diagram point of view. It's great because it has links to documentation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the architecture is not some of the different flows. I personally would love to see all the end-to-end scenarios that Microsoft's doing in their documentation, building out the diagrams through the Azure diagrams.
I would imagine they're going to do more of that. I mean, that would be my initial thought, is they're just going to keep using this tool, and this will be their new tool for hopefully doing all their architectures. And then it'll be like an easy, here's a one-button link share of the architecture that we built.
Well,
so it's got some interesting things to it.
The group is from Microsoft, but it's not a Microsoft-funded project.
That's my interpretation as well. It sounds like it's 3 engineers from Microsoft that said, "Hey, we could build this. This makes sense. We'll just do it."
Makes a ton of sense. To Tommy's point, though, like Visio, Lucidchart, like Visio is a Microsoft product, but like if they're libraries of icons and all the things that are out of date or you have to go grab online, and so if this is a way where it's like, hey, it's always going to be maintained and pull the latest stuff out of Microsoft, and like I'll use it. Like,
right?
A lot of my system is in Microsoft. Like, okay.
If you're Microsoft shop, this makes sense.
Yep.
Excellent. Very good tool. Would highly recommended. Go play with it. It's free to use. You can even sign in. And when you sign into it, you can then save your diagrams. You can then hang on to them for later. I believe you can also get examples or work off of things off the community. And then you can continue to modify them or tweak them for your needs as well. So kind of a neat idea. This tool is using something that I think is a core value that Microsoft should lean into more. Microsoft should be focusing on building tools that are community focused. So build the infrastructure for it, but think of a way that how can I involve a community around a new feature? Let me give you one example. Have you seen some of the video? Have you seen the demos around in visual calculations from Jay? Jay's now talking about this inside user groups. Have you seen those? Okay.
I haven't seen any demos.
You got to watch the demos. It's actually pretty interesting what they're doing with this. So I'm liking the feature. It does come with its layer of complications. And Tommy, to your point around governance and administration, in Visual Calcs, add another whole ball of wax to can we monitor and govern these new calculations that are being made inside the context of the visual. And it's supposed to be doing simple things like, hey, look, you've made a visual and I want a simple running total.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. But that calculation to make the running total doesn't live in your data model now. It only lives inside the visual. So it's not in the semantic model. You can't go get it from Analyze in Excel, just in the visual. So it's that I don't know if I love it yet. And I understand why they can't push those things into the semantic model. Makes sense because it's using the semantic model, but it's not part of it. Anyways, all that to say is they have this ability of using these quote unquote templates to make calculations in the visual. And I was like, guys, this is the same thing you made with quick measures. Quick measures was this potentially amazing thing where people could make their own quick measures and build whatever they want. And then you could have hundreds of these things, company standards around quick measures, but they never opened it up. It never became a community thing. And I'm like, you guys missed the boat on that one. Like people would have loved to have pre-built DAX stuff. And had they done it, I think you wouldn't be having all these challenges around why is DAX so hard. You'd be like, oh, I'll just go to this gallery and I pick out the things I like. So
okay.
I think
no. Of course, you'd still have the challenges around DAX. We know. No. Yeah, it would be a little simpler, sure.
Maybe.
But it's always about your data model. We know this.
Well, it's about learning how to use DAX. That's the problem, I feel like. And when you watch other people, so that's how you learn VBA. That's how I learned like writing macros in Excel. Like I would record what I was doing, and then I would watch the output of the code, and then I would start learning with, oh, okay, that's how I would do that. And then with a little bit of Googling, I would fill in the gaps of something. Like that's what we want DAX to do, right? Build me some generated or other templates across the internet around DAX. Let me understand how they're working. And as I see examples over and over and over again, some of that I'll start educating myself. And some people just don't care and then just keep copying off the things on the internet.
I'm personally finding it a bit insulting that you're equating VBA to DAX, but I'll let that slide.
Just programming languages.
So you're so generous today, Tommy.
So generous.
So many things slide.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. What else did you find on X, Mike?
Well, another one we found here. Yes. Let's move on then. Another article came out, Tommy, and this is one that you pointed out here, Tommy. There's another article around time traveling through data, and Microsoft calls it the magic of table clones. Wow. Sure. I felt like to me, this feature seems like a bunch of marketing to me at this point. I'm not sure. I didn't quite understand the use case of this one. It's the idea that you can go take a table from your lakehouse and you can clone the table, and then it keeps the time travel features of said table when you're cloning it. I mean, okay. I'm not sure. The Delta tables has this concept of versioning of tables. I can't tell you the number of times I've actually used going back in time to an earlier version of a table because I screwed something up. It very rarely am I going back in versions to see what the data look like.
Is it versioning or is it carving out historical data? Like that doesn't need to be part of your main
duplicate
table.
at a point in time.
Creating a duplicate at a point in time.
So to me, this speaks to, if you're using in the Delta format is just creating bunches of tables already by default. Every time you edit the table, either with like an insert or a delete or any kind of modification to the table, you're creating a whole library of new Parquet files behind the scenes that you're able to then go look at. And then what happens is you get this log file that just says, hey, I'm on version 1. Okay, we made a change, version 2. So to me, it looks like, what's the big point here? I didn't understand.
Hey, I'm just ripping through it real quick. Like I suppose table clones facilitate development and testing processes by creating copies of tables in lower environments.
Now that I could see a bit more helpful. Hey, I can go to production and then I can clone that table, get a read-only copy of it somewhere else, and then do my data work on it. And then I could probably
So
Hold the code.
here are like 4 points of table clones, I guess, from a value prop perspective. I'm just ripping out of the Microsoft documentation.
Yeah, go ahead. What does it say?
Table clones provide consistent reporting and zero copy duplication of data sets for analytical workloads and machine learning modeling and testing. Okay.
Mouthful.
Table clones provide capability of data recovery in the event of corruption.
But you have to manually do this.
Create historical reports that reflect the state of data as it existed at a specific point in time.
I don't think I would use versions of that. In my opinion, I think I would build a specific table to have all the data in it, as opposed to trying to rely on the versioning of tables to see its state over time.
And you have to, when you hear time traveling in your title, you're thinking some Marty McFly type of feature.
Definitely.
Yeah, of course.
And 5 miles an hour.
Yeah, but it really is the only problem with that, I think, being more of a production thing is you have to manually clone each table at the time that you need it to be cloned. So you can't go back. Like if I want to clone something from last week, too bad. So I have to say, okay, this week or this Monday, I'm going to clone these 7 tables. And now I at least have that historical feature. I think you can still do this in T-SQL through code.
Yes, you can.
You could probably write the automation in Fabric. They're simply giving you the UI UX feature to do this.
The wording of the SQL statement is create table as clone of, and then you write the name of the table,
which is available in Fabric, like everything in the data warehouse.
Yeah.
But you can now utilize the UI to do this as well.
So, to me, the only thing I can see that I would think initially immediate value is I need to copy things from production into lower environments so I could read them, figure out what my data problem is, work on top of them, build my engineering code around how I'm going to fix this pipeline, whatever that thing may be, right? If I haven't found a problem, and then I can roll the code or the deployment through the different environments and not have the table copies. And it's named the exact same thing, right? So it's important if you're having like notebooks that are accessing this database, this table, because you need to have that table referenced by name in each of the environments. You're not going to want to do like table 1 _ dev, because then you'd have to physically change your code as you move through the different environments. It was interesting. I'll see if I can actually find some better use cases with this one. It's a neat feature. I do like the fact that they're giving the UI version of the name, so that it doesn't make sense that they have a UI that's going to help you with this a little bit, but still not thoroughly convinced this is going to be amazing yet. Proof is in the pudding. I'm going to call it a goals type feature.
Oh, we're spicy today.
We're spicing it up. All right. Enough of our news. Let's jump into the main topic for today. So our main topic is from Umesh Bharat. I think that's how you'd say his name. Sorry if I butcher your name. But we're talking about the data product operating model. Data as a product. All right, jump in. Initial thoughts. Tommy, you got your mouth open. You're thinking there's something there. Either you're yawning or you got something to say.
Yawning.
Oh, okay.
You get called on anyway.
Yeah, you get.
That's fine.
You're gonna get called on. What's your initial thoughts?
I hopefully don't disagree with you guys too much today, but it's this idea of taking. This is kind of a brief summary of the article. It's just taking the idea of what we normally consider our data projects, we're going to call them products, and put it more into the Agile Scrum method. And what normally goes on to, if you're developing a software, you're developing a website, which is usually known as a product of that, not necessarily the dev test prod, but how does a project actually get cultivated, who's involved in that process, and including like a project manager, and how fast it should go, and what is the methodology to actually create data products in this case. So talking about moving faster, talking about in terms of how like utilizing stories and epics. My initial thoughts from here is I've tried this. This is not a new idea for me, at least back in the day when there were no projects around BI, when BI or at least Power BI first came out. I mean, we tried Agile Scrum, we tried the 2-week sprints, and for different reasons and different scenarios, we found pros but a lot more cons in trying to take business intelligence and then try to fit it into another type of methodology or project methodology, which didn't seem to work. But that's where all these start off.
Oh, I'm gonna love this conversation.
Okay. as soon as you said Scrum and Agile doesn't work for data projects, I think you just riled up Seth right there.
No. I mean that's some of what is being described here in the article as well, right? Like that revisiting the Scrum methodology. And Umesh is like, yeah, it's a well written article. I think like from data product for versus project, right? I think I agree with that, right? Like the things that we build are very similar in focus that engineering groups and development groups in other areas for applications, et cetera. Like there's a lot of crossover. Like we have sources of information. There's a bunch of ways we need to transform it. There's a product that we're producing related to a report, whether that's a Power BI report or a set of data, whatever the case may be. Like there are a lot of crossovers in there, and I think we've talked about that ad nauseum, right? Like there's a fine balance here between IT and business, and some of the structures of how we go about building these products is important. So what I don't know where, like, Mike, do you want to?
I got some initial thoughts.
Intro, okay.
Yeah, I'll just do a real brief thing while you kind of collect some thoughts here. There's a diagram in the middle of the article. Actually, there's two diagrams. There's one talking about a process. Start here, build requirements, develop product, get a test version out, manage that, get feedback, and go back and add or refine requirements. I think his initial product development cycle is a really good diagram to think through. And you need to, I think this is actually when I've built data products or projects or tables or things, this is really very relevant. Get an initial build out quick, get people looking at it. And always, in every data project I've ever been on, there's always some, I don't understand that. This doesn't make sense. These numbers don't seem right. And then it's not that the requirements initially were wrong. It was people's understanding of what the data actually was doing. They didn't really understand what's in their data. And almost every time we come back to, there's some data quality problems. Now we need to add some business rules into this process, or some cleaning or something like that. Or it becomes a series of action items that people upstream need to go fix their data before it comes into our process, because we don't want to build business rules for the sake of doing that because someone else didn't do their job and clean their data. So this management piece on top of your data engineering product or process, whatever you want to call it, needs to be there. And then my second thought is there's a second diagram that talks about the tooling that kind of encompasses all the different people. And I think he dialed it in right. I think there are people that play the role of the data engineer. There's people that play the role of the business analyst. And if we're not thinking about it, there should always be some layer of stakeholder capability in this mix as well. So I think the mix of those three people, while that may be one or two people, the roles in which they play is very relevant. And you need someone representing all those areas, or you need input in all those areas to actually produce a good data product. The stakeholders have to stand behind, sign off on it, right? The business analyst has to say, well, what is the business actually going to do with the data, as opposed to just give me a table. You say, just give me a table, it's minimal impact on the product. And then the data engineers have to sit down there and listen to, I'm going to physically work through the technical challenges of the data and say, well, you can't join it this way. It doesn't match. There's no keys. How do you want to join it together? Oh, and then the business analyst figures out, okay, well, we get to work through that challenge, that issue, and redesign the system so it actually works. So I like the idea or the concept, all of it. I think later on in the article, it gets a little bit more interesting, where he starts talking a bit more about Scrum and Agile and how that works. And I'm not sure I have an opinion on that one per se. There's some thoughts, but I'm not sure if I lean one way or the other on that side.
Then let's start on the first area that you're talking about, because this goes back to our episode 264, the low user adoption rates. And we had a huge conversation around, when does the project really end? Does it end when I publish and it's in the app?
Sure.
I think we all came to the conclusion it really shouldn't. And we really shouldn't say done, move on. And so there's a lot of that crossover here, which I completely, the more since that episode I've thought about that, the more that needs to be part, I think, of our own process of really, when we publish a report, there's really a second phase that needs to begin on the adoption and then user feedback.
So I want to ask you a question around that, your point there, Tommy. I love your point. Are there data projects that you've done that you have grabbed some information, put it into a report, and you've totally walked away from it and not made any major adjustments, just personal stuff, like stuff you're getting data around, like, we have the podcast, we do analytics for Google and things there. Are there any projects you have in your mind that you've done that you build it and you walk away and you kind of use that report over and over again without many adjustments?
Never.
Seth,
because,
have you done that?
Yeah.
And so where I'm going is, maybe what this question is, I have a very few amount of projects that I can say, I built something, I made a data model, and I walked away, and I regularly use that report, that same report, without many changes.
Regularly using it.
That's the point.
Yeah,
you can build it and walk away and come back, but like it only makes sense if you go back to the report often and say, here's a report that I built, and I need the data in it, and it's designed the way I want to use it over and over again.
This is such a good point. Like our podcast report, the where I get the data, is a great example, because I curated the data, I was getting from all the sources and built it, and then I published it. Then I'll take a look at it, and go, I really wish I could see this, and I'm like, okay, got to go back. Yeah. And this is for me. This is something. This is our data, and
that's my point is. My point is, I think the needs, like when you initially look at your data, you have a perspective on what that data looks like. And I think as you, over time, look at that same report, the reason you go back to that report, you should go, I think I want to see it a slightly different way, or I have a net new question that was not previously answered.
Your needs are evolving. We talk about it all the time. Like a business, even when we develop a report for them, especially if it's something that you're using on a day-to-day basis, absolutely. There are going to be improvements or enhancements that can be made.
and maybe that's more of my point here around this, the latter half of this article is this concept of like, you can build a report, you can push it out, but to assume that the initial needs of that report are consistent and they stay the same for a long period of time, probably a misnomer, and the questions will evolve. So how do you build for that? Maybe.
Let me carry on your question real quick, because I think this is going to be a pretty big distinction too on what type of requirements are we asking. On those types of projects that you go back to, are you asking yourself, man, I wish this was a bar chart? Or are you looking at something like, I want to see this measure this a different way, or maybe it's like a 2-week rolling? Which one is it usually, right?
The latter more so than the former.
Yeah. And maybe it's going into a bar chart with whatever you're going to build, but you're either looking at something going, well, what's the 2-week rolling, or what's that compared to everything else? Which is it now going to be a different calculation? To me, that's where always the tinkering is.
So you're gonna say something too, Seth?
Well, yeah. Your question was, how do you build towards or build for the evolution of a report? And my initial answer would be by setting a solid base of a first report. And and in many cases where I think that is skipped without process or too fast of an iteration, it causes many more issues down the road. Because if we don't, like, especially for some reports, right? If you don't understand what the scope of the report is, the intent, what are the things we're supposed to be looking at here, then the end, and I'm not properly communicating that, right? Like that's one of the things we talk about a lot. End user, even in that low user adoption rate things, like if they don't know what it's supposed to be producing, then they're going to have their own expectations.
That's a great point. That's a really great point.
There's a base level scope I can provide in the time frame that we have to develop this product for you, and then we can move on from there. What I'll find interesting in this conversation, Tommy, with your different experiences and where you actually land right now, is I have seen that a bit of structure in developing these things is absolutely paramount to have the right sort of thing to start from.
So we can, the actual structure, I by no means disagree with you on that. In terms of for the project development, it's not just okay, when a ticket comes in, we're going to work on it, because that automatically starts a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of frustration around. I'll let you guys kind of dictate where do you want to go from here.
I have another point around Seth's comment that I liked your comment, Seth, and I'm thinking through, like, okay, let's imagine, okay, I'm thinking the scientific method here to some degree, right? How can we take out some of the variables in this process? What are some variables I can remove? Like, for example, let me speak to some of my experience, right? I look at all of my consultants on my team, and I need to understand what they're working on, when they're working on things. So I have a report that I've built for them around, like, here's what you're working on, here's your status. For me, I also have a report that says, here's my team, here's what everyone's doing, so I can understand, like, what we're working on. And then while I'm making adjustments on, we're working too much on these projects, we have some due dates or deadlines, we need to shift the focus here a little bit. This is a report I look at almost daily now. And so because of that, I have very clear questions up front, and I have very clear actions I take now looking at the report. And I know what I want to do. And I've been using the report enough to say, I understand what I want at a high level, the aggregated form of data, and I know what I want to go down into, or what details I need to use the report. So everything, there is a repeatable process or a repeatable question I'm asking over and over again. So this data set, or this report, again, I'm trying to be a little bit scientific here. This is not going to somebody else. This is just me. I'm looking at this report as only I need it. So there's no education needed on how it works, what buttons were there, why the visuals are there. Like, there's no that's a whole nother ball of wax, I think. That is, as you build reports for other people, there needs to be an education pattern that's going on there, bar none, because there's just not enough, how do you say it? There's just not enough of that being done today. So therefore, people are given things and they don't know how to use them. Therefore, they just don't use them. Where I want to go back to here,
the propensity to not use it is there, right?
Yeah, correct. What I want to go back to is the data model that supports this thing. So behind this is a data model that I understand, I know, I built, I created it. I'm beginning to think a data product is, yes, partly the report side, and I have this single report that I built, a thin report. It's got a very defined scope. Now, in my mind, the data model's key, and so what I'm doing now, I'm finding myself doing now, is I'm having new questions asked of the data. And so as I'm asking these new questions, to your point, Tommy, what does this look like compared to last period of time? Like, some comparison things. I'm thinking about, like, how do I performance or optimize my process a little bit? And in doing that, I've forced myself to now start to build other thin reports that are not part of the core report. I'm physically seeing myself resist the capability of, I can just modify my report. I can just modify. No, connect another thin report, experiment with the questions I'm trying to ask, put visuals and things on pages that may or may not make sense. And then if I like that, then I can migrate them over to the core report. And so as we think about this Scrum or Agile or even a report building process, right? Potentially, and again, I'm going to introduce a concept here, is maybe what we should be doing more often is, here's your standard report. We don't touch it. If you have additional questions, let's do a little bit of side work here. Let's do some more experimentation around, here's other ways of looking at your data, building other visuals, making different pages. Do these things work? Use them for a week. Quick, fast prototypes. Try it. Does it add value to you? Come back and review. And if it does add enough value, then roll it into your standard thin reports or whatever you're doing. So I'm finding that works well for me. I don't know if that'll work well in a bigger team.
Where the emphasis to me, I would put on this, because I do like that and I do agree, but I think the context there is a little different, because that's a single person, you looking at a data set that you created.
I'm just trying to focus on a very specific scenario, but like, this could scale out to like an entire team. And lots of people potentially,
but you're at this point the consumer and the developer.
I know it's different because I have this
and the
whole
stakeholder. So you're all three.
But I am. But you're right. All those things, like you need all those, but this is why I think you need more prototype thin reports on what you may want to build, because you need all that feedback from all those different people. It's not just me internally communicating like, okay, this is what I need. This is my stakeholder perspective. Okay, now I'm going to put my business analyst hat on and think about like that. Oh, I could engine the data like this. So I can do all the roles myself, which is cool.
Right.
But in reality, you're going to have potentially those roles broken across multiple people. And now you got to figure out, how do we all talk together, get on the same page?
Because you as a stakeholder also know as a developer what's possible and what I can modify and how long it will take. The one emphasis I do want to put though is we were talking about the apps and like app development, website development.
Sure.
I don't like putting reports or content in the same category for one main reason. When an app's developed, the people who are going to use it have to use that app. Like if I'm developing a business application for product management, well, that's what everyone's going to use. There's no other way around it. A report does not have that same, in a sense, specification or prereq, right? That report's out there, but it's not required for you to do a task. You may, that may be your new sales report, but that's not always the case. If I'm building a new application or a new input or form, well, that's what the business now has to use in order to input X, Y, and Z, which you're going to get a lot of feedback because there's going to be a lot more eyeballs on it because that's what they're using. Reports, there needs to be an emphasis on that initial stage of, we've just published this. We talked about this, about the adoption, about the promotion of that new content.
Okay.
This is really important.
I think I don't. Okay. So you're saying that it's not the same thing because a user has to be taught how to use the report, or like it's a thing in the ecosystem.
It becomes a thing in the ecosystem, not now your new way or your new like road or avenue where an app is.
So I can see where you would say that if they have access to the data in another way, but if this is the only way that they can get the data,
this is true.
That's certainly not true. And then secondarily, I would argue that if we're going to go through dev efforts, we should treat it like an application that everybody should be using and do the appropriate things that we need to ensure they use it. Otherwise, you just wasted everybody's time.
I agree.
So that's where I don't agree with you. Like, it absolutely should be looked at as something that we push out much in the same way that we would in an application. Like, the only difference here is you don't have the other teams that are on like UI UX and like marketing and all like the product and like where they're developing like the release notes and everything that's going to be in there, and like people have to use it and go to it every day, you assume, right? But if they were doing their jobs, they would do that.
No, and
but in the same way, like reports are just as valuable, or should be, to provide information to people. But so I'd rather say they are absolutely like extremely important, because otherwise, why am I wasting my time doing any of this?
And I would agree, but I think the difference is more, there's not accountability around consumers utilizing reports.
I think we're talking the difference between desired and actual is what we're hearing. Tommy, I feel like what you're speaking to, Tommy, is what actually happens. Seth, I think you're speaking to what we desire the process to look like. Like, we would all agree, documented, understood, sent out. And is it certified? And I would add my little phrase: is it certified? Right? If it meets that certified criteria, yes, we do want to have those kind of quality checks on things. But where I'll go back to, Tommy, to your point, is the reports are just a commodity, a thing, and not necessarily an app. Is like a process by which we have to like force people through to go use data. I would argue you're right, but I would also want to use the app. The app is my distribution model, and I want to have multiple reports in there. And I may even have like, based on audiences or things like that. Why wouldn't I publish multiple reports in there where we have some of the standard reporting? Again, it's hard to get down. This is my point, though, when I said earlier, it's hard to get down to the single action I need to do by looking at this data all the time. What is that? There are questions that occur only every so often, and there are questions that occur all the time. Identifying what kind of question you have, and I'm literally teasing this out as we think here because I'm putting these two theses together. If you're looking at the questions I have all the time every day, that should be like a standard part of the report. When we have questions that are just hit or miss or random or debugging, or those will be so much more ad hoc in nature anyways. And those questions I think are best served by having an understood data model and letting people go pick through the data and go build what they want to build. Or here's a hodgepodge of visuals and or tables that come out of the model. Maybe these will help you, but they're not answering that single question over and over and over again. It's this like there's these rando questions that are happening on the side. Would you agree?
I to an extent where for me it's still more around a business application requires data input that's where everyone's going. Mike, in all of your clients and Seth, in all of your experience, have you seen accountability around users not using a report or someone being penalized, a team being penalized for not using a report? That's out there.
How would that be any different than an application?
I would say my answer would be no. And it would be, usually it's not penalized. It's more of like, you don't get access. It's either like an on-off, like it's on-off. Like either you have access through our thing, because that's the only way we're going to give you access to this kind of data. I see that it's more of like the stick side of the carrot and stick portion. Use this because that's the only way we're going to give it to you. We're going to not let you go build your own stuff somewhere else. Now, I've also seen very strong armed organizations around, you only get this data model, you can only read it and you can't export it. You only get it in our report and nothing's exportable, which could be totally fine. And maybe that's the right scenario for more of these repeatable, commonly asked question type things. Maybe that's where it goes.
Right. And how are you going to get those questions without eyeballs, without that second stage? And I think that's where I'm trying to get at.
People already have those questions.
Not every report is going to be like the daily report that people have to go use. But if we're talking about one of those in this context, and like you're equating, like the way you describe an application is like somebody can't do their job without it.
Yeah. If I'm building a business application, there's a new process that a team has to follow in utilizing that application.
A team process, yes, in the same way it should be with reports, with specific reports, right? Like, this is where I'm like, if this is supposed to be a day-to-day game changer, if this is supposed to provide insights and somebody should be using it on a daily basis, there are things that you would do in the same way that you would roll out changes in an application, that you would expect users to use the application in the same way you would have users and an expectation that they're using your report, because without it, they wouldn't be able to do their job, or your report isn't providing any value. But let's make the assumption that it is. That means that person is not doing their job.
And I completely agree with that. I think what I'm trying to get at, again, this may be a parking lot thing, is if I create that application, that's the required way of input of data. You have to input something through the application. The report's all consumer. Of course, there's the accountability on input, because if you input it wrong, that's going to show up. The other way, where you're getting the output of the data, if I don't look at that, I don't know if any team who's been penalized, well, we need feedback, or you need to utilize this report. It's just, oh, take a look at the report. I haven't seen it yet. Okay. And it kind of ends there. Someone can actually get penalized for not inputting the data correctly.
And that's a process thing. That's a process thing.
Yeah.
That means when you implement that report, if it's supposed to be as valuable as it is for the business, then people need to know about it and they need to be held accountable to use it. So like I said, that doesn't, in my mind, put it in the realm of reporting, and what we build is not just as important as what you would do in an application. You're describing that somebody cannot do their job without going into the application. And in the context of a lot of the reports that we build for the business, if they're not using it, they're not getting the value out of it. And there should be the same sort of, oh, you're in trouble kind of like methods, carrot, stick, whatever. If your job is to enter data into the application and you're not entering data, then you're not doing your job. if your job also includes looking at this report to see how, like, what your percentage is of entered data in the application, and you're not looking at it, then you're not doing your job. But it's also the organization has to say, like, hey, there's this new thing we built. Our expectation is that you're monitoring yourself or doing these things and using the report in this way. Not all reports fall into that, but I would tend to believe that those are important to the business because they're spending money building them. And if we're not getting engagement, then we need to fix why we're not getting engagement, not think that what we're producing isn't of value.
Everything you said, I completely agree. My only argument is in a data culture, and I don't think that accountability is there for a lot of the teams. But again, we
I
can
would agree. I think we have a long road to push for those types of things, because without it, then you're wasting time. You're wasting the business's time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'd agree with that one too.
That just cuts off that managed side.
I do want to roll into this other part though, which is the Scrum and Agile model like effective for development? And Tommy, your description right in the beginning was, I've tried this and I've tried that, but you didn't really land on like what it is you do today, or what do you think is an effective way to produce a reporting product?
So we'll call my intro a hook, so to speak, on the intro. So no, when just kind of a bit of context, a little background. Power BI first came out, we were early adopters at our organization. We were lowly data analysts who became Power BI users. And the need to move from the existing source, there's a lot of Excel, a lot of other different products, into Power BI was paramount. And the amount of requests that came in and tickets and people realizing the data, the influx was huge. A small team, the entire business. It was a central BI team.
Yep.
And we tried these 2-week sprints, which did not work from a development point of view. From report creation, especially, we found a little more success with data engineering with a 2-week sprint. But for report requests, for report creation, for that side of it, the 2-week sprint, we would find like, well, we got more feedback. And they're like, well, no, we need to complete this report in this time frame. But as you went through it, you realize like, well, we're getting more feedback. They want this change beforehand. That same idea of we're doing discovery. Well, there's now that iterative feedback approach. And now we're going to do development. So that trying to fit things in for every report in that method didn't work. The Agile Scrum method, or at least the stand-ups every day, worked fine, but you realize that we have more reports coming in than we can handle. And just working on things on every we're going to say like, what are these stories, doesn't work, because we realized it was more like a help desk. And what I actually came to when I was director of BI and moved forward was this help desk system, and really like a priority impact matrix, because we realized not every report is the same.
Not every request is the same.
Not every request is the same.
Agree.
So we had a impact matrix at least developed of who is the team, who's asking for it, what's the business value, trying to rank that. Is it coming from an executive? Because that all automatically takes priority. Is this something that doesn't exist that we need? That takes priority. Where's the value there? And then that went to basically how we prioritize the projects in the help desk.
Okay.
It was more important for us to make it transparent with the business rather than having this 2-week sprint. So they knew where their project was. They knew where their request was in the time frame. And if it did become from the team more important to work on, or like, well, I can't wait that long. I know I'm in the backlog, but I can't wait that long. Then at least that was a conversation with their executive or their vice president, and a conversation with our head of data.
Was it certified? I'm serious. Like that. Are you was your team focusing on building certified things, or were you? So there's 2 layers to this, right? There's the layer of you're addressing what you're describing to me is why it didn't work is because you had a mix of known questions or problems that we're regularly answering every day with common reports. What I'm hearing you say was there's a whole handful of like We're just trying to help the business answer a lot of these ad hoc questions. So that's where a lot of these other tickety type things came in the door. I can't get this. This report doesn't do that. The users are using these reports and they're physically asking different questions of that report. The report probably wasn't even intended to do exactly all those things or answer all those questions. So this is where I would argue, like in this case, there needs to be a delineation between, sprinting and agile. I think work better for certified reports because you're adding process to what that is. There's another world of this that's more like, I would call it like a Kanban process.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally requests come in, we prioritize them, and we just work from the top down. And like you just do them and get them done. So I think if you try to put both of those processes together and do everything the same way, it doesn't work.
Yes,
and I think that's what your point is, right? You can't always think of like everything as a sprint. You can't, because in order to do that, in order to sprinting is good when you have a defined amount of work for a certain period of time. That's what the sprint's good for. So requirements are done on Monday. Build happens Tuesday through Thursday. Mm-hmm. We release on Friday and acquire feedback. The next week, we come back and say, do we have new requirements or are we adjusting things? What are those new requirements? And you continually sand, refine, tweak, and then the report after a couple of weeks actually meets the needs they're looking for. All this other junk is just noise to the system.
I mean, it's still important, but you're right. The project-based things where like we need to create a new user tracking for all of our tables to create a unified ID. That's perfect for the sprint method because it's the kind of, we're getting the requirements is longer base. But I mean, 80% of at least the quantity or volume of work was requests coming in. We do need a new report, maybe off an existing model. And it may not necessarily be certified, it may be coming from a team. Our sales team wants to see everything in a different way. We want to see, the first 3 customers this year kind of thing, which still important.
Yeah.
But doesn't fit in that Scrum method or does not fit into the sprint method.
And I'm smiling here. You can't see me.
What doesn't fit?
Okay.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I mean, in general,
it's what seems to not fit as much is more things that come from the help desk, where it's single reports, different views of the data, new ways to measure it. What seems to work or what has worked a lot better because it is more of that. That I think that approach is more project-based work, where we have to integrate a new data source into our system. We have to, we're utilizing now this new platform. We have to find a way to integrate that with our sales team. We have to find a way to integrate that with the customer ID. We're creating single sign-on. We need to create a way to do that. We're migrating from, table X to table Y, so to speak, in all of our reports.
I would argue everything you just described, and that works well with Scrum and Agile. Those are big projects. Those are big things.
Yeah.
You can't throw big projects in with, I need a new report.
Right.
Because new report builds should be, and my thought here is, as I'm hearing you describe this, I'm saying to myself, what you're describing is we don't need that. What we really need is you need an ability to, big projects go through Scrum and Agile because there's large requirement gathering up front. And if you miss some of those major requirements up front, you could screw up the whole project and you could waste weeks of time building the wrong thing that we don't need. On the other hand, if your team is focusing on, I'm the team that's going to be building all these reports, and again, I kind of knowing your background, Tommy, like your team was the central data team, and the rest of the organization was not equipped enough to go build their own stuff. So, in my opinion, here was, if your models are so complex, if your models are so hard to work with that you can't give someone else a model, or you can't start self-servicing a model to a champion in a department to start doing things in their own department, that tells me 2 things. Either your company is not big enough to start delegating, work of the report builds to the individual users. At the end of the day, what's really important, and this is where I think the Scrum and Agile makes sense, what are your data tables that you care about? What is the relationship to the factual type data? What are we going to calculate? What are the measures or basic measures that we need? That's your bare minimum. That's your table stakes element there. The work should be focused around making that right. because then you can hand this over to the business and say, look, we know we can't answer all your questions about every little piece of data you have. However, when we're thinking about things analytically, here's where you can bring the calculations from. Here's your handful of tables. Oh, and by the way, if you want to build any kind of analysis between these two different factual types of information, call it promotions and sales, that's usually two different data sets. So either you have to merge those two data sets together to get one solid one single fact table, or you're building dimension tables in both that link to both of those fact tables. To me, the value would be here is you need to teach people, this is an education thing, or the skills are not right in the team yet. There is a people problem that we're addressing, and we need the people to be able to self-service to some degree.
So here's where I'm going to weigh in, because a lot of I think
About time.
I'm
drowning over here.
I think I've found a hybrid approach where I agree with some of this, but other aspects I think do fall into a same standard process. And I think that's what's important in all of the things that Tommy just described a lot of is people find themselves overwhelmed and need a way to manage not only expectations, but communicating with the business what can be executed on in certain timeframes. And that's what this whole thing was designed to do, right? Create some breathing space and also clearly articulate and deliver in timeframes that could be acceptable. I think it's important to understand what is a quick data request. Give me the logic, give me the columns. It's something that we'll throw into the 30-minute like thing. Boom. We're just going to keep throwing these in. What I've found is so let me back up. Tommy, priority matrix, like that's just work item status. Like how you set those things and how they come into a workflow. Like it can be managed within tools. Like I'm a Jira user. The types of requests that are coming in all the time, like you need to groom your own backlog, you need to figure these things out, etc. Yes, there are the big projects, and I think we all find agreement. Like it's great. You go through full groomings, other teams are probably the product owners or project, right? Like they're coming in, you're talking about them because they're big lifts. I think where the hybrid comes in, I think, is with report builds, we are assuming responsibility for a lot of those grooming type activities. But that's where I would argue it's more important that we follow the process or stick with a process that is aligned with these systems that manage execution, because otherwise you, like, especially in larger teams, it's like in the article it describes like, oh, the whole team needs to get together and execute against this thing. It's like, yeah, that's great, but that's not how the world runs. Like all of my team is spread out doing different activities and tasks, and there's not always this realm of like, yep, somebody can work on the data set, somebody can work on the report. Like it's usually the same person. So having this process where I have a story, but there and a process by which there's an understanding of how we engage with the business, and those are tasks. The tasks are what get assigned in sprints, because I'm not going to say we're going to get this thing out in 2 weeks. What we're going to do is we're going to iterate through a lot of the things. Discovery. This is where we're doing the grooming. This is where we're gathering the requirements, talking with the business, understanding all the nuance. And I do think that that's important right out of the gate, as opposed to allowing business to dictate what it is they want, because that challenge comes in with what you described, which is, oh yeah, we started building something and then they were like, nope, we don't want this. Up, nope, no, we don't want that. Up, nope. Like, I'm sorry, that's not how this works. Up to a point, like we'll adapt, we'll define, but when we're defining what the base is supposed to be, that's what we're shooting for in a collaborative method. If all of a sudden, as we're finishing up, you're like, oh, you know what I need another page, and we need to, like, yeah, I'm sorry. Now that we've defined the base, that goes into our cycle again. That gets scheduled. That's getting pushed out. We're not doing that right now. And that's how you control that conversation. So I think like what I've done is I'm still sticking to this process. And I still have a lot of the framework for Scrum methodology, where twice a week we're meeting with the team, because it's important that the team members understand what's going on with everybody. we are doing groomings, or at least scheduling those meetings consistently for people that want to show up. We are doing technical planning. We are estimating things, and we do follow a 2-week sprint always. Does that mean we're not flexible? No, but it means that we can stick with a methodology in which we want to engage with the business and set ourselves up for success, and being able to clearly articulate when we can deliver things. And I think that's the most important thing we get out of sticking with that cycle, even though not everything flows through the cycle in the same way. And I think that's the difference here. Is I'm not saying everybody's got to come to a grooming, you've got to formalize thing. I'm like, no, we're the BI team. Like, we will be doing those things, but it's probably in conversation or it's in a meeting, but there's a structure to it. It's just the business people who are making these requests. And we know this 9 times out of 10 don't know what they want when they make the request.
100%.
They just know they have a need.
100%.
I have a need, and we're like, we will address your need. Here's the priority we're going to affix to it. And when we engage with you, we have a methodology that we always follow, so we can do all these things with the business, which is, where's the time, like the team time being spent? Where are we, like, what are we dialed into the right priorities? How much can we deliver in these, these time frames? Where are we at in the phase of the project? Like, all that shouldn't be this ambiguous, like, backlog of like, oh, now we had this thing, oh, now we had this thing, because then there's utter chaos. So I guess where I push back in, like, Scrum methodology and whatnot. I agree, because I think there's this hybrid area, but we are still following that process, just albeit in a different way.
Yeah.
I like what you said there, Seth, and I would agree. This works well for me. That same pattern works well for me as well in projects. There is certain things, and this is where I'd said, and this is why I'm on the certified jam right now. I don't know why. It's just things that are certified. Yeah, there's a regular release cadence cycle, and you don't try to push stuff out as fast as it comes in. However, that's like, I don't know what percentage, 60% of your team's time. There's another 40% of time that's just, okay, 2 days a week or every morning from this time to this time, we're just doing ticket pushing. Like, and so I think there's a hybrid approach where you have to carve out, there's only so many people to do all the work. Types of work. Yes. Yep. And then if there are, and then the business has to understand, like, look, we've got longer strategic things happening, as well as your short-term quick wins with building your reports, doing these things, whatever.
Issues, enhancements, little fast reports. Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
You have to meet both needs at the same time. So it helps. You can't do either one. You can't focus solely on one or the other. You have to have a hybrid approach of kind of a mix of the both of that workloads.
The more you guys talk, the more I've said this before, but the more I'm on the train, not just the certified train, but the establishment of the BI team as a BI department. I really think this is the logical next step in organizations. Because right now, Mike, you keep saying this, and I know that this is kind of the protocol is BI's under finance. I'm beginning more and more to disagree with that. Where
I don't say BI is under finance. I say finance.
A lot of organizations.
I say you delegate. Well, I mean, okay, I will say this. Observationally, the people that hold the checkbook, who understand the value of data, is typically finance, because finance can't even do their job unless they're getting all the financial data. And so usually this is how I see it, right? Power BI was born out of Excel. So this team is already the best Excel team you're going to have in your company, almost bar none. Inside that team, you're going to have experts who understand the data engineering, the business rules, all the shaping, like they get it. And they're building databases inside Excel, which is incredible. So awesome. But that's the team that says, hey, we can now use this Power BI thing. And then sometimes that spend just gets attached to them just by default.
But then leads the next question. Who's the C-level in charge of BI usually?
I think it's the CTO where it typically falls, because we don't have a very well-defined scope of what the CDO would be doing. Because
I mean, but is it though? Like, because even in your I think it's all over the place right now. Like sometimes it comes into the CFO, right?
I'd agree.
Sometimes it's operations. I think it's just by hybrid, depending on where a group of data people like grow or where the focus of the business is. But I agree with Tommy, like, and where I'm at, like it is a, I mean, it's CTO, but it's an independent body. And I think the impact you can make to an organization is larger in that realm, because then you truly need to rely, like, a couple reasons. One, you're plugged into the enterprise systems 100%, and the teams that are going to help facilitate and support that realm. Two, when we look at increasing the value of data culture or building relationships into all business units, right? You're looking for people. Finance is a perfect one, where you have experts of data, right? That you leverage them as an organization, right? There's a central team that is providing value in terms of training, enhancement, data access, et cetera, but you're doing that across the organization and not just within one singular business unit. And you're looking to skill people up across an organization. Like, I don't see how you would, like, succeed in a lot of the adoption and data culture things without that being an independent team.
Yeah. And like, to your point, if you're trying to create a structured methodology or process with an unstructured team, where, well, we may live under under finance,
right? Big challenge.
It's a huge challenge, because again, where does your work get dictated? It's going to be from your manager to whoever their vice president or C-level is. If we're going to have this hybrid approach, which I completely agree with, because the other parts of your team is not just those big projects. It's not just help desk, but it's also the adoption. It's also, the promotion and of the technology and the people utilize this. So you're not just doing project-based things. One of your projects may be adoption. And how are you promoting
Right.
data? I think more and more that the need for business intelligence being a department who has a C-level who's dedicated to this, because we know how much data is getting created. We don't just live building technology, and we just don't live under the numbers, right? Because we're in charge of so many areas of the business where the requirement for all of us to work effectively with the right stakeholder, with someone who understands this. To me, it has to fall under someone like a CDO or someone who understands the three main areas.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put under a CDO. I don't think people defined a CDO well enough, and organizations are still not defined. I don't think it's going to get there, honestly. I don't think
buy you a steak. We'll put
I think it's going to happen
from now.
I've tried to look at what CDOs were going to be doing. Because that was a role I was seriously interested in looking and doing, a CDO role. And there's too much ambiguity around what that looks like. Is it a security role? Is it technology focus? Is it only on data? There's so many. The CD, like, I read an article recently that was like, why all CD roles fail is because it's not well defined, because there's not a scope. So what happens is, I think the CDO role is likely shared or underneath the realm of the CTO, the chief technology officer, or potentially there's some executive. I don't think it matters. Honestly, I don't think it matters where it sits. I think all it matters is what Microsoft speaks to is you need an executive sponsor to be that person to run and own the vision and the leadership of that central BI team. Where it sits, under finance, under CTO, under operations, I don't think we care, honestly, as long as they have someone who's responsible for it and understands the vision of where you're going with it.
Mike, before I turn 40, I'll bet you 20 steaks. That AI and 20 steaks before that AI and data, there's going to be a CDO type level, because where AI is going, that's going to fall under data. That's not going to just fall under technology. And where how much data is getting created and the technology around data, I'll bet you 20 steaks.
How many organizations have even thought about their data being a strategic asset? I think companies are just starting to get that point.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Mike. I think it is very dependent, and you need to be very specific about the roles and responsibilities of a CDO within an organization.
Yes.
I do agree with Tommy in that. I think if you are going down that route, there is more than enough responsibility for data within an organization that could be aligned to that role. But at the same time, like, I agree with Mike in current state. When we're talking about a group, business intelligence, like we're taking We are part of IT. We are part of business. It doesn't matter who owns that, provided that we're running that group with both of those things in mind. And I think that's what we push. The structure of IT for this group, it is 100% a good thing to manage the influx of everything that we have, more so probably than any developer group, because of the way they can control that work stream. Whereas there are business pressures and there are things that turn around much faster in business intelligence teams. And it is much closer to the business because we are trying to solve those problems in incremental phases, even from a step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of thing, right? Here's value, but our underpinnings for this thing are on like they could break at any time, right? Mm-hmm. Phase 2 is we're gonna while you have value, we're gonna build up the accuracy, the governance, the quality of the underpinnings, and you don't need to know about that, and then we'll iterate, right? So I do think it's much more agile, in terms of a Scrum methodology or whatnot than developer teams in general, can be.
Will there be an ultimate role that is a CDO? Maybe, I don't know. I think the things that we expect a CDO to do are going to be broken apart existing roles that are already in the organization, and they're just going to pick someone and be like, "You're the dude for data. You're doing good with it right now." Dude. I mean, seriously, like in companies I was in the past, there are pockets of teams that do really well with data. All right, let's wrap up here. Let's do some final thoughts here. Tommy, give us your final thoughts from this article. Great discussion today. I thought this was really relevant. Give me a couple of your final thoughts and we'll wrap it here.
Yeah, I mean, I really think the big takeaway for me is the evolution of BI you're seeing with the evolution of the process as well. We started off with trying to fit into different buckets and realizing that BI does exist with its own process. I think we're going to continue to see that trend in the roles, and I think we're going to continue to see those trends in leadership as well.
Seth, what's your final thoughts here?
I would just say have some structure, but don't be bound to it completely in the way that we would see other examples of. But in order to effectively operate as a team, communicate, and deliver in ways that we are expected, that hybrid approach that I kind of talked to is one that I've found to be successful.
I'll give my last final thought here. I think this conversation centered around, there are certain types of questions that are repeatedly asked over and over again. There are reports that can be used for long periods of time. Identifying those things and turning them into projects makes sense because you can solve the problem and you can get value out of it and you can walk away and let it run for a longer period of time. There's a whole nother world of ad hocing reporting and unknown questions and this kind of, we're just trying to get insights on data. And if your central BI team is running all that, you need a different process than Scrum and Agile to meet those needs. So I see like there's two worlds. There's project or process-driven stuff, and then there's ad hoc and the questions are changing. So you're going to have to manage that work differently, some other way. And you're going to have to split your time between the two. So I thought that was a really good conversation today. Thank you all very much for listening. We appreciate your time and your listenership. If you're struggling with your data process, comment below, what are you using? Are you doing a mix of both? Are you doing something else one way or the other? So we'd really appreciate your comments. Please make sure you share this with somebody else. We don't do any promotion. We don't pay for this to get promoted anywhere. It's all word of mouth. I don't know it's all by you sharing and letting other people know you found some value from this. So we thank you very much for listening. We appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable. If you would do us a favor, share it with somebody else and you found value from this conversation, we'd love to keep having more of these and continue talking about this stuff. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. Helps us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to Power BI Tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
And if you want to win, or if you want an opportunity to win 20 stakes, go to X, formerly known as Twitter, and go bet Tommy something. Doesn't matter what it is, just bet him something, and you too could win 20 stakes directly from Tommy Puglia's pocket.
You can find me on Twitter, not X.
Whatever. Either one. You can go find him anywhere. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.